Hey, good morning. I'm Paige Browning. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. Washington's waters aren't as clean as you might think. One big reason for this is hundreds of abandoned boats floating in them. The boats themselves are trash and may be leaking toxins. So why can't we just get rid of them? Aspen Ford investigated the issue and is here to explain it. But first, let's get you caught up. The Seattle Police Department says it's hired more than 100 recruits recently. SPD Chief Sean Barnes says they come from diverse backgrounds, with many speaking at least 2 languages. City leaders say the hiring increase is due to efforts to modernize the recruitment process and reduce application times. Barnes says recruits will be trained in subjects like cultural competency and de-escalation techniques before they earn a badge. The starting salary for an entry-level SPD officer is $103,000. Seattle Public Schools will give an update today on the search for its next superintendent. Brent Jones announced this spring he was leaving the district. The district hoped to have its new leader in place by this fall, but that won't happen. The school board says they wanted to give community members more time to give feedback. The deadline was extended to August 4th. Today's school board meeting begins at 4:30. And keep your eye on the sky tonight for 2 meteor showers. The Southern Delta Aquarids and the Alpha Capricornids will both be visible after midnight tonight, peaking between 1 and 4 a.m. NPR reports that both meteor showers combined could produce up to 20 to 30 meteors per hour. Both meteor showers are best viewed facing south. And of course, to really see them, it's best to get out of the city and away from light pollution. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. How do you dispose of a massive military ship? Turns out the answer has been difficult and a bit toxic in Washington state. There are hundreds of former government ships abandoned at docks. Aspen Ford from Investigate West has been reporting on this. She's a Roy W. Howard Fellow, and she's here now. Hey, Aspen.
Hey, Paige. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you on about this investigation. Let's start by setting the scene. I alluded to this, but how many derelict, abandoned boats are floating around in Washington?
Washington's Derelict Vessel Removal Program has an active list of 300 abandoned or derelict vessels in Washington right now.
That is a lot of derelict, massive boats floating around. We're a boat state, from cruise boats to fishing vessels to military vessels to ferries. Walk me through how such a huge item, such a huge investment comes to be abandoned in Washington.
A lot of times what I found through my reporting is that when the Navy or the Coast Guard or any other government agency wants to dispose of an old vessel that no longer works for them or has reached the end of its functional life, they have a disposition process, and basically they end up in these public surplus auctions where anyone is able to bid on these boats and buy them.
I am going to have more questions about this auction because I'm amazed that basically I could just go on there. I have no ship experience and buy one of these, or at least bid on one. But what other options does the government have to get rid of a literal ship?
So right now, there are only 3 shipbreaking facilities in the United States. The government could destroy its own ships at one of these facilities, but they are all located in Brownsville, Texas. If the Navy here in Seattle, for example, wants to destroy an old ship, they have to get the ship seaworthy enough to travel all the way down through the Panama Canal and around to Texas. It's a really long journey. It takes almost a month to get there, and it's extremely costly in just travel alone. And then they have to pay for it to be destroyed. So it's really a lot easier just to, kind of offload the cost onto the next buyer.
And what happens if the buyer is not equipped to deal with a massive, unsaleable boat?
Pretty much as long as they can afford to buy it at the auction, it's up to them. They have their own, discretion to do what they want with it. Once it's sold, the government ceases to have any responsibility for the boat.
Can you talk about the boat at the heart of your investigative reporting? What is the boat and what's its story?
The Pacific Producer is a now derelict fishing vessel. So before it was, going up to Alaska. So in 2022, the boat was traveling through a waterway in Tacoma called the Theophos Waterway. So at this point, it's nearly 80 years old. It has patched holes, streaks of rust. It's a 169-foot vessel, and
Wow.
It's traveling in this really narrow channel, primarily used by small recreational boats. There's people who live in this channel on their boats at these marinas. What happens is it starts to pass the 11th Street Bridge, and the antenna of the boat gets caught. And so the captain loses control and frantically throws out an anchor to prevent a collision with other docked boats in the area. The captain ended up maneuvering it over to another facility, but it was left there for over a year. And specifically in the Theophos Waterway, it's a Superfund site. It became concerning when the Tacoma Fire Department found the boat, and it didn't look like it was in the best shape, and so they conducted an inspection. And when they went on board, the report of their inspection says the ammonia smell was so strong that the crew felt it in their eyes and their nose.
Wow. So its boat's been sitting here for over a year, and firefighters just happen upon it, get it inspected, and it is in bad shape.
Yeah.
What kind of environmental damage did this boat cause during this process?
When they noticed the ammonia, they immediately sounded the alarm to a lot of other agencies who had to be involved. That included the Department of Ecology, the U.S. Coast Guard, Washington's Department of Natural Resources. They all came together to remove the ammonia. They also were able to remove 25,000 gallons of oily water.
Whoa.
5,000 gallons of diesel, 14,000 gallons of miscellaneous and oily waste, and then 3,500 pounds of ammonia. So it was quite a lot. And then while all of these response operations were underway, a patched hole gave way.
Oh, no.
And the boat started taking in all of this water from the ocean.
Oh, so now we've got a sinking problem with a 169-foot-long boat.
Yes. And so they had to put a hose into the hole and pump the water out, all the while also removing diesel, ammonia, other waste. It was a really long process. It took over a week.
Washington has a derelict vessel removal program. How does that fit into all this?
The derelict vessel removal program is responsible for basically getting rid of these ships out of our waterways. So, boats like the Pacific Producer aren't common. They are a small subset of the overall picture of abandoned vessels. The main vessels that they deal with are recreational craft, and they're very easy to deal with compared to something like the Pacific Producer. The problem with the Pacific Producer, from the perspective of the vessel removal program, is that when these boats come around, they take up swaths of their small, state budget that they have to remove all these other 300 other vessels. In the case of the Pacific Producer, the agency takes bids from all these contractors who show proof that they're equipped to remove and destroy these boats, trying to see who can give them the best deal, because it is just a very expensive process to, one, remediate, remove all of the hazardous materials, remove it out of the water, and then completely destroy it. And they actually try to recycle as much of the material as possible and do it in an environmentally sound way.
So where is the Pacific Producer now?
So the Pacific Producer now is in Tacoma waiting to be destroyed. After the response operations were completed and all of the hazardous materials were removed, it took the derelict vessel removal program a few months to get custody of the boat. And once they did, they realized, this is going to be a huge cost to destroy. At that time, they didn't have enough in their budget to destroy in that biennium. So instead of destroying it then, they docked it at a marina in Seattle. So it traveled from Tacoma to Seattle, and it was left at a marina docked for over a year. And in that year, the derelict vessel removal program paid for moorage fees, security because there were trespassers. They paid for pest control because there was a rat infestation. They ended up paying almost $300,000 more just to moor it at the marina in Seattle, and also for, security and pest control fees. So they're spending $300,000 more just because it was so expensive in the first place. They had to wait for their new budget. They were able to move it back to Tacoma. It's going to be destroyed at actually a concrete facility. So they're making, their own makeshift shipbreaking facility. And it's going to take over a month to destroy, and it's going to cost over $1 million. Once it's all said and done, it will have taken almost 2 years and nearly $5 million to safely remediate and destroy the Pacific producer.
Wow. And this is one vessel we're talking about on a long list. Derelict fishing vessels, old Navy ships, other government vessels and boats. It's a lot of money to ship one to Texas to be taken apart. When we put them up for auction, that could kind of fall into anybody's hands. What is the solution here to aging derelict boats?
It's a tough problem. I mean, Oregon and Washington alone have spent over $21 million getting rid of these old government boats. It is really expensive. One of my sources worked for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and his sole role in that position was to help people around the country and even around the world dispose of these huge derelict vessels. And he made a really great point that I keep thinking about, and it's that in our economy, we have a lot of ways to dispose of things like cars, RVs or whatever. But vessels, we don't have a standard way to dispose of these. So, there's the idea of a ship-breaking facility and, on the West Coast or somewhere closer than Brownsville. But looking at it economically, would it make sense for the Navy or the Coast Guard or, whatever government agency to have to pay to destroy them? Or would it be easier for them to continue offloading these costs to people who are wanting to buy the boats? At the end of the day, it's just no one is prepared to destroy these boats.
What is at stake for us if nothing changes about how the federal government gets rid of decommissioned boats?
The derelict vessel removal program has a biennium budget, so a budget they get every 2 years. It's about $10 million. So the more that these larger old government boats come into play, the more that they are abandoned and need, intervention from the state agency, the more that they'll take up their budget and they won't be able to destroy all the other boats, and we'll have, more and more abandoned boats in our waters. I think the biggest stake is just for the environment itself. If no one is there to report it, it's just, a little environmental disaster in that area.
Aspen Ford is a Roy W. Howard Fellow from Investigate West and has been reporting all of this. Aspen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, Shane Mailing, and Patricia Murphy. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW are members of the NPR network. I'm Paige Browning. See you soon.